Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're broadcasting from the Thomas K. McKeon Center for Creativity, and I'm your host, Corey D. Taylor. My guest today is Neal Nordlinger. He is a former Hollywood producer turned crisis manager. It all started because his family went through a personal crisis. If you want to know what it's like to go from one life to a different life and be able to be there to support other people that lives are going in crisis, then you come to the right place. So stay tuned because this is Up Close with Corey Taylor. Welcome back, and we have an amazing show today. I am joined with Neal Nordlinger, former producer and now crisis manager, as well as my normal guest, Dr. Gina Pazzalia. So Neal, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. I don't come to Tulsa too much, but I like this town.
Well, good. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad, Dr. Gina, you were able to join us. And I'm just
glad to see you, Neal.
I just have this question, and I always ask my guests this question. What is it that you've been up to lately? I know, I just come straight out the gate.
I've been up to
Then
lately.
we go back, we reverse it and come back to the real stuff.
All right.
I've been doing something which I absolutely adore. I had no idea that I would be doing this. I work with families who contact me when they're affected by substance abuse and or mental illness. And what I do is with them what I could have really used for myself when my son, my younger boy, we discovered that he's a heroin addict.
Wow.
So the first question you ask yourself, I won't tell you the first thing you say, but I will say, but basically it comes down to like, oh my God, what the hell do I do? Mm-hmm. You know, and so it's a matter of like, there's so much for one to know, mm-hmm. and it's impossible to know everything. But if you have somebody who's been through it, who can work with the family, makes a huge difference. It really does.
So I know we've talked before about you doing the interventions. I know a lot of families are well-meaning. Talk about some of the dilemmas that you have with the family members as you're trying to do this intervention.
Well, it's very, very difficult for family members, especially mothers.
Yeah.
Because what it is, if they have a son or daughter who's living at home and is a drug user, what's wrong with the addict says, this is great. I've got a roof over my head.
Yeah,
I have food in the refrigerator. They give me money when I need it, whichever it is. And so there's no reason for that person to change. It's only so the parents are actually enabling.
So you really take a tough love approach with the families, or else there would be no change.
Well,
I know, because I've had my own share of family addiction stuff, that it's really hard for the family members to feel like maybe they're abandoning their kid or their loved one by taking those action steps.
Well, I tell mothers and fathers, especially mothers, that you are going to feel like the worst parent on the planet. Mm-hmm. It is totally counterintuitive to a parent's nature, because you want to look after your children. You want everything to be right. You want to provide for them.
Right.
Unfortunately, what I tell parents, and it's true, is that, well, you providing this, unfortunately, you're killing your child.
Well, check this out. I want to say this before we start. So you said you're doing something that you love, and so you're a crisis manager now.
Correct.
Okay? And your company in crisisconsulting.com, that's where people reach you.
In crisis consulting.
Yeah, in crisis consultants. And it was interesting because when I went to your website, it talks about all of these interesting things about helping family get treatment. And if they're in crisis, literally you jump in because the shock of what's going on with them, it floods their mind, like Dr. Gina was saying, and they can't think through the process.
They don't know what to do.
No, they're very vulnerable,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And unfortunately, there are some bad actors in this business in terms of recovery and treatment facilities, and a lot of times people they'll be taken advantage of. So because there are over 14,500 treatment programs in this country. So can you tell me right now which is the right one for your loved one?
No.
Okay,
So how do you help families find the right one for them? Is it the economics, or what do you go by?
Man, that's a really good question. First, you have to realize that there's no such thing as one size fits all. Okay, there's no such thing as one rehab that can take care of everything. There are certain rehabs that are really, really good for mental illness and substance abuse. You know, mental illness is the primary, substance abuse is the secondary, and the reverse. You know, substance abuse is the primary and mental illness is the secondary. Then there are places who are really, really strong with just substance abuse. So the first one I was saying, when it's mental illness and substance abuse, that's called dual diagnosis. That's called the person needs dual treatment. So you treat both maladies at the same time. Unfortunately, it's anywhere from 40 to 60% of the people who go to rehab, they have a dual diagnosis.
Well, and you know, the tough thing about dual diagnosis is that what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Totally.
You know, and I always prefer to address the substance abuse issue first, because if you don't get that curtailed, it's only going to escalate the mental illness. What have you seen?
Yeah, you've read the book.
Yeah, well,
Wait a
I've
minute.
done this
Wait
for
a
a
minute.
long time.
Let me jump in here with my limited background. Now, Neal, you're talking about you're doing something that you love, but I want to say something, and we're not going to stay on the loan, but you did something that I still love, and you are a former movie producer from Hollywood. So then I want to talk about, so we're not going to stay here long, but
That's all right.
How did you go from
funny.
producing movies and being, with, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito, Jr., Shattered, all these movies. How did you go from that into this? And I know you said it started with your son the youngest son having a heroin issue, but tell that story, because I understand from Dr. Gina, who she didn't never really tell me the whole story, but she said it's a very interesting story. So can you take us back to that before we get down La La Lane and start talking about more treatment stuff? That's where I live, people.
Okay,
I want
we'll
to talk
live
about
in
that. So go ahead.
world. Let's go
Let's
here
for
for a while.
a
Let's
few
go to the
minutes.
film world.
Well, first of all, you're looking at one of the luckiest persons on the planet. Okay, I knew since I was 12 years old that I wanted to be in the movie business. And fortunately, I was able to do it. I'm one of the very, very few who actually could do it. So I'm very, very lucky. I went to USC Cinema. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I went to USC Cinema School.
Wow.
And now, which means that I have a diploma, but it's the most worthless diploma on the planet
Well, it served
outside
you
of the
some
movie
way.
business, let me tell you. You try to get a job with just that. So I was lucky because I was in the movie business for 35 years. What really kick-started it. And unfortunately, the movie business is probably one of the worst businesses in this case, in that it really depends upon who you know.
Okay.
You know, you could be the most talented person in the world, but if nobody knows who you are or it doesn't give you a break, it's like,
And I try to tell people that, and people don't believe me. And I tell them, I said, listen, because even with this show and everything, it is all about who you know. Because I used to be a former actor, by the way, traveling from Kansas to Louisiana for a 15-second audition to be a security guard.
Yeah.
And then I would get there and they'll say, and here's the deal. They would say, we have 2 parts you can read for. And I'm like, cool, pick the one you want. And I'm like, I'm going to pick something that's not a security guard.
Right.
So I go in and I'm like, yeah, I'm finna read for Tommy. We want you to read for the security guard. Well, I didn't do the security guard because you said I could pick. No, we already got somebody for Tommy. We just kind of sent that to you. And now it's like, I just drove 11 hours and I'm not getting a part because it's all set up unless I knew someone. So you're absolutely right.
yeah, it has everything to do with luck. But you have to be there to recognize it and then take advantage of it.
Yes.
Now, I will say I was lucky because when I was a child, I'm convinced that one of the main reasons why I was able to meet people was because I had a really terrific backhand. Okay, so I mean in LA, a lot of people have tennis courts. So if you can play tennis, decently, you can meet a lot of people.
Wow.
And the thing is that if you get along with them and they get to trust you, it's sort of like, it's like everything else in this world.
So it's tennis there, it's golf here.
Well, it's golf there
Probably.
too.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
But there's a lot of tennis
good
there.
at tennis. I would have never known that. That's a really interesting piece of information.
But just briefly, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the one who really is responsible for giving me my first big break.
Wow.
And he was doing a TV movie for a little production company called Alan Landsberg Productions. And he was playing, Jane Mansfield. She was married to a guy named Mickey Hargitay, who was from Hungary. And ironically, he was a bodybuilding champion. So it was a natural role for Arnold. And that was the first real establishment role for Arnold. He had been in Stay Hungry and Pumping Iron, and he really wanted to get into dramatic, movies. And so he took the role, and he brought me along and introduced me to Alan Landsberg, and it took off from there. So
wow,
I'm very lucky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so now let me
amazing.
ask you this, because I still want to get back to your story. Now take us from movie to crisis manager now. You talked about your youngest son having his issue, but when did all of that happen? Because you were in the film world,
Wasn't there
but then
an invention or something?
Yeah, you were in the film world.
Yeah.
So, but now tell us how did we get to crisis? So give us that little journey.
Well, I was in the film business for 35 years. I know I look like I'm 20, but it's true.
I would have never known.
And I decided after 35 years of doing something, I wanted to do something different for the next chapter of my life, which I had created an interactive web-based platform, and people, they really liked it, and it's kind of like Google Docs, but a lot
So a little
also very
earlier
different.
than
Yeah,
Google Docs.
earlier.
Yeah.
And so I moved out here because one of my lawyers is originally from here, and he recommended that this would be a really great place to start a company. And I was lucky, I did, and we got it up and running, and then I get the whole thing about my son.
Okay.
Now, it wasn't like, okay, great opportunity, why don't I change? No, what it was is that people started calling me, people who I knew, people who I didn't know, friends of friends, and say, listen, I understand what you're going through with your son. I have the same problem. What do I do?
So it was sort of like organically grew from your experience with your son. Then as people contacted you, you're like, well, wow, I do know what to do. So is that kind of how it grew into something that became a business?
That's very much how it went. But people kept telling me that professionals in the business that, wow, there's nobody here that does what you do. We really need this.
Here in Oklahoma.
Here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure people
Yeah,
would
we
know
have
that your
huge
connection is here in
elements of-
Oklahoma.
Right,
even though
but I have clients all over the country.
Correct.
But my base is here in Oklahoma City. I go back and forth between here and Los Angeles, but my base is really here. But I help families, all over the country, Nashville, Seattle, Washington, D.C.
Well,
as an example.
Oklahoma, we have the highest rate of
We have a high
substance
rate of a
abuse,
whole lot
mental
of stuff.
illness. Yeah, I always say I'll be in business
Divorce,
forever.
pregnancy,
Probably you also, unfortunately.
doing the counseling that
Yes.
you're doing. Yeah, so go ahead. So you talk about you got clients all over the world, and you go back and forth from here to L.A. So go ahead and finish your story.
Well, what I'll do is I'll sit down with the family, and if there's a clear diagnosis, I get contacted by families, I get contacted by hospitals, attorneys, defense attorneys,
Wow.
and psychiatrists and therapists.
So you take them also through the court stuff then?
Yeah, just
Oh, wow.
last week. Yeah,
That's-
I've been
whew,
part
that's
of
complicated.
guardianships, court orders.
Yeah, I try to avoid that mess. It's so complicated.
It's really, this is a real, here's, lately, and it would be great if people really understood the following. Yeah, we have an epidemic when it comes to substances, okay? No question about it. I mean, you figure that 70 million people in the year 2016 used an illicit drug.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
insane.
Now 28 million people used an illicit drug within the previous 30 days. Okay. Now, out of that 28 million, okay, you've got 21 million who have a substance use disorder. Okay.
Wow.
However, only about 10.6% of those people actually get treatment.
Well,
actually
and
go to
what
rehab.
about the ones that are prescription addicts? Then that's not even included. The ones.
No,
that,
that's included in
Oh,
all
okay,
substances, and including alcohol. But you say, Mike, that's a huge amount of people. You know what? There are 44.7 million people in this country who are walking around with a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So there are actually twice the amount of people suffering from a mental illness than there are from substance abuse. Then you have people who are suffering from both.
Well, and a lot of times the substance abuse is self-medicating because they're not getting help for their mental illness. So you've got those combinations that are really stepped into the picture.
So I want to interrupt you all both because I hear you all saying something. Because I want to interrupt you because I think this is real important. Because when all of the shootings were going on in the country, everybody was talking about banning guns, but nobody was looking at mental health. And then what we're finding is that there is a direct correlation with criminal acts that have a lot to do with mental health and drug abuse. So I want either one of you all, let's start with you. Let's speak about that real quick. How much role do you think in our criminal justice system the drugs and the mental health is playing in people being incarcerated?
Well, first of all, especially here in Oklahoma, there are no longer any mental institutions,
Right.
like what we saw in
Right,
Cuckoo's
exactly.
house and so
Right,
forth.
right.
So you know what has taken the place of those mental institutions?
Prisons.
Prisons.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's terrible.
We got a huge problem in this country. Now, real one way to take care. We know there are studies that have proven that there are basically 4 million people in this country who are incarcerated. Okay, we know that when you concentrate on treatment, okay, there is a net benefit for every dollar that's spent on treatment. There's anywhere from a $7 to $14, sometimes $28 net benefit.
Wow.
So what does that say to you? That says that we really have to put a lot more emphasis on treatment, and also obviously trying to prevent substance abuse.
We met through a common gentleman, Gary Schoen, who actually was talking about the reforms going on in
Right.
Oklahoma related to developing more treatment centers rather than building more prisons, because there's so many people in the prisons that then have mental health issues and they don't get treatment at all. And then what's the likelihood of them getting out and reoffending and going back to prison without the treatment?
Well, not only that, but ones who have a heroin addiction, they go into jail, and I can't remember what the percentage is, but if they go back to drugs, which a lot of them do, they die because their tolerance, they've been in jail and they've been detoxing in jail. So it's and also when you talk about heroin, there's a horrible, just insidious drug called fentanyl, which is drug dealers, they use it to cut it with the heroin, and it's killing people. For instance, last year, 2016, 2015, 52,000 people died of overdoses.
Wow.
Okay, last year it was 64,000.
Man, so that's a lot of statistics. And the thing that when I was doing some consulting to help people get jobs, I was running into this situation that I was seeing a lot of people that were, drug offenders and all of this. And then when I would talk to them, I would say, well, what did you go to jail for? And they say, well, because I had a drug problem. And then I said, well, what did you do? When you heard the crime, crime should be punished, but they wasn't a murderer. I stole something out of a store to feed my drug habit. And I'm not saying that that's okay, but the time that they were serving based on that was, to me, was like overkill, And I remember one time I had a parking ticket, and I went to the city hall, and it was people behind me scared. They didn't want to go to the window because one dude was like, I had parking tickets, about 5 parking tickets, and he was like, he spent 18 months in prison. And I was like, whoa, what? And then he's like, yeah, so, pay those parking tickets. I'm like, well, I'm here at the window to pay mine. So it seems like in Oklahoma, and I'm actually going to do a show where I'm going to bring on guests, and we're going to be talking about the incarceration rate of people in Oklahoma, that our jails are overcrowding as we speak. People are sleeping on the floors and everything, but a lot of these people need to really be treated for mental health or substance abuse versus crime.
Yeah, part of the problem is, that we'll address, I'm sure, in future shows, is the privately funded prisons, and then the need for federal funding and all kinds of double dipping type of stuff, which is not ultimately good for the community or the people in the community, but it's good for somebody's pocket for sure. But, being able to treat the multi-milieu of issues, which, poverty, mental illness, substance abuse, those are the core things that ultimately land people in those situations. So creating some solutions is really imperative.
Neal, I want to ask you a question. And because we got, this show can reach the potential up to 4.3 million viewers in the Oklahoma and the surrounding states, at the edges of those states. Take us through when a family gets the dual diagnosis, their world has been rocked. They call you. Take us through the process from beginning to end.
Well, if there's already a diagnosis, then I already know what the issues are. If there is no diagnosis, then I will take them to people like Dr. Gina, for instance, because I don't do the diagnosis. I let the professionals do the diagnosis. That's really key because that will tell me, okay, what kind of facility does this person really need? And the other thing is, okay, so which facility depends upon, okay, who's going to pay for it and how? And if people have insurance, even if it's not like very good, it doesn't. There's some programs in Oklahoma which do not pay for residential, but if you have some insurance, it makes a huge difference in your life in terms of treatment. It opens up a whole panoply of options for you. If you're doing private pay and you're like really well healed, well, you know, the world's at your feet. You know,
Wow.
I mean, I've had people write checks for $243,000 for a 90-day stay at a place.
Gosh,
Now that's
that's
insane.
crazy.
That is
That's like a
insane.
resort,
Okay.
isn't it?
It is actually, and I'll tell people, you know,
resort.
you don't have to do that to
Right.
get
Right.
into recovery. But I'll tell people, you know, a lot of times, you know, whatever you're doing there, you can also do for free in a church basement. You know, sometimes.
true.
So money really doesn't have anything really to do with the quality of the treatment. What it does is that the people who are running it, the people who are looking after you, that's the key. And some places will have all different kinds of therapy available to you, such as equine therapy. And that's working
great.
with
I've
horses.
sent-
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah,
it
I've
really
sent
makes a
people to
huge
that.
difference.
It's
So,
amazing.
and one other item, is that especially if it's a millennial, okay, I want that person out of town. I really, and I
absolutely.
make up a plan for at least a year with the family, because I tell families that, first of all, the treatment is usually 90 days. And normally, the first 30 days is residential, the next 30 days will be PHP or partial hospitalization, and then up to day 90 will be intensive
Well, stop for a
outpatient.
minute, because I know some of us are in crisis illiterate. What is PHP? What is that?
That means partial hospitalization.
Okay, well, hello, audience. We just learned something new. Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, what it is,
I caught it.
there's detox.
You're a counselor. Go ahead.
There's
Advantage.
detox. If somebody needs to be detoxed, especially with alcohol, okay, that can last anywhere from 3, 4, 7, 10 days, okay? That's expensive. The insurance companies don't like paying for that, but if there's a medical necessity, they have to. And then the next level is not quite as expensive, is residential. Okay, and then they like to limit the amount of time that you're on residential. They will sometimes make the facility get authorization for treatment every 3 days.
Wow.
I mean, it's insane.
Yeah,
okay,
that is.
so residential is anywhere from 14 to 25, 26 days. Should be 30, but it's not. And then the next level down is called PHP, which means that normally there's some places where the patient will stay on campus where he or she is, but most of the time they will live off campus in a sober living house, or what they call structured living. It's either sometimes owned by the facility, or sometimes the facility doesn't own it but has a contract with some of these houses. And then the person will go live in that house and then go to what they call outpatient.
Okay.
Okay, every day. And that's fairly intense. The hospitalization is like all day. Okay,
Right.
and then usually it's back at the place where you were having
So the
residential.
IOP is usually like 4 hours a day,
Correct.
3
Sometimes
to 5
3
times
exactly.
a week.
Okay,
Yeah.
stop. Time out. IOP for our
Oh,
viewers. What does that look? See what I'm going through, people. Us that are in this crisis land that don't know what's going on. We got these two professionals, so I'm breaking it down for you all in the audience. So in the viewership,
Intensive
yeah.
outpatient.
Okay, intensive outpatients. So we got that and PHP.
And Dr. Gina has it all. She has it down.
She got it. I know. I have to listen to this all the time. But go ahead.
So
I'm sorry about that.
So now, the insurance, if it's a good policy, will cover all the treatment. However, it won't pay for the housing. Okay, so that means the family's gonna, or the individual's gonna have to come up with anywhere from $800 to $2,500 a month. It depends on where it is and what kind of house it is. But the important thing is that the patient is living in a community, a sober community. because they cannot do it alone. A lot of times, especially millennials, will say, okay, I got this, I can do, and move into an apartment by him or herself or with a roommate. It doesn't work because they really have to be in a house with other addicts or other drunks who are a support system for that person, and go to meetings every day, every night, or at least 5 nights a week. And I tell parents, and I want that patient to be away for a year.
So do you have the parents during this time typically go to Al-Anon, the treatment, outside treatment for the families to learn how to not continue to enable and how to set their own boundaries?
Exactly. And if
Al-Anon. Give us that. See, y'all are using me. See, that's what I'm here for. I'm like, feel like I'm a mediator.
Al-Anon is like a 12-step program that is a community-based program that family members can attend to. They're kind of addicted to the addict, and so they
some
can't.
codependency
Yeah,
type
so
to help with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
to help with the codependency.
it's also a way for the parents, the whole family, to understand.
It's a disease,
you're not
a family disease.
The most important thing that a family can really learn is you're not alone. You're not alone, and it's true. Addiction used to be looked on as a moral failure, okay, as your character is damaged. We know now it's a mental illness.
Yes, it's a disease.
So, Neal, this has been some great stuff, and Dr. Gina, this has been some great stuff, but we are at a point now where we have to end. But I want to ask you a question that I always ask everyone. Since you've been doing this and even your film career, what would you say that a person need to do to obtain success? What have you seen that it takes for a person to have success?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think it's the same for everybody, but I can tell you that I wouldn't say that I'm the paragon of success, because everybody has a different level of success. But I think the bottom line is, are you doing what you really love to do?
Wow.
And it's something in which you have a lot of passion. And because it's my belief, and I know from my own personal experience, if it's something which I don't really love, that's really not a piece of me, I'm terrible at it.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to thank both of you all for coming. I want to thank you, Neal, for coming, and you for joining us again, Dr. Gina.
Fun, as
All right.
usual.
It's been fun.
I hope you've enjoyed our show today. I would like to thank my guests, Dr. Gina Posalia and Neal Nordlinger, for coming. Think about this: change is inevitable, but your attitude towards that change, it is always optional. Until next time, keep looking forward.